Live. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Wednesday, April 5th, 2023. Time for another show. Time for another Jewish holiday, in case you want to throw that in there, too. Tonight, Passover begins, so that's fantastic news. The rest of the week and the rest of the show, I guess, will be relatively gluten-free as we avoid the breads, and leavened breads anyway, although I guess... yeah, if we got to go out of our way to... it reminds me, I need to go find gluten-free matzah, which is a thing, but not that readily available. So, not for me. I don't know. Well, maybe I should experiment with the gluten-free lifestyle. Now's the time. Don't really know why it would, but it seems like a good time to do it. It seems like good times generally. We are under the sunny skies and rainbow of a Donald Trump arrest, I guess. We could say that. I mean, it's a pretty decent day, right? I mean, like I was saying in the Morning Post, Greg Dworkin and I have gotten you KITM listeners through some pretty dark times. There's been some good news along the way, to be sure, but we've gotten through some pretty dark days by getting together and talking through the news, and I guess today would be a good one. It's the first time since we've been on the air that Donald Trump has been arrested, so that's good. And, I mean, he was released, of course, and pending trial, and who knows how long it'll take to get this case to trial, but everyone wants to talk about the 34-count indictment that was released yesterday. I don't. Not that much. I mean, I don't mind talking about the fact that it's there. There's some analysis of what we do know. And then we really, I don't know, if you want to get any further into it, you really just should wait for the trial. But it could take forever for them to get to trial. Their analysis will begin to emerge about the New York law under which Trump is charged and how many, which elements need to be illustrated, and do they have the evidence to do that. But it seems like a fairly strong case, at least by some reckoning. So that's nice. That's a good way to start. The elections that Greg has been warning us about for the past week plus, maybe a little bit longer, out in Wisconsin, that comes out well. Mayoral race in Chicago comes out well. So good electoral news, good arresting the former guy news. Pretty good start to the day in that respect. And, where it gets dark, I guess, is, Trump and his family and his followers have been living up to the usual standards, apparently, spending the last couple hours since his arraignment and his, rally-style comments and speech that he made from Mar-a-Lago after being released after his booking and arraignment, went back to Florida, and took to, in some instances, CNN and others actually covered him like campaign style, and in fact, like waiting on an empty podium and showing that on screen and everything. It was really kind of disgraceful to bother with that, but they went ahead and did it. And of course, he gave, a rambling speech. Oh, and by the way, I guess he's been listening to the show. His latest weirdo talking point, I'm sorry, I guess I shouldn't have introduced this one to him, is that Special Counsel Jack Smith might not really be named Jack Smith after all. I mean, we're kidding, but he's A, supposedly serious, and B, former president of the United States, allegedly, and up there stroking his chin and amusing that he may have changed his name for some nefarious purpose, probably to disguise his funding from George Soros, or I don't know what he's got in mind. Doesn't really matter. But he, his family members, his followers, also pretty much as expected, posting photos of the judge's children online on social media because they love kids so much and want to protect them, et cetera, et cetera. You know how they are and where they're coming from on these things. So hopefully, he pays for that at some point. It's not usually good for your case and makes other judges hate you too, so you can't even do that well by transferring your case out of the hands of the judge you think is biased, because now they're all going to be more or less angry at you for doing that to their colleagues. But, Trump has never really, shall we say, understood anything or been able to function as an adult in American society under normal circumstances. So, okay, these are problems that we have with this guy, and we'll have to learn to deal with them. All right, let's see. Other information. By the way, very hot story now, the story out of Tennessee of the 3 legislators who now face expulsion from the body of the Tennessee House of Representatives. It wasn't getting a great deal of attention yesterday, but then, the reporting made things pretty clear, I think, from the local reporting from the Tennessean that we were able to share with people, and social media has turned it into something of a cause célèbre, and quite rightly so. So, that's good news. We're pleased about that. There's some additional information beginning to circulate. Scott shared with me this morning that Judd Legum had done some additional reporting on the situation. I read over his popular info blog / not quite Substack, whatever it is we're now calling these things. Not quite blogs, not quite newsletters, I don't know. But at any rate, he's got an additional round of information, although, I don't know. I think we filled in the story pretty good yesterday, although I'm still unclear on exactly what the procedure is for these expulsions. They had some kind of procedural vote yesterday or Monday, in which they voted to go ahead with an expulsion vote that I think is scheduled for Thursday. That actually sounded like I was somehow in tune and in harmony with the ringy-dingy music, but I don't know. Anyway, we can make a song out of that at some point. It sounds like the vote is scheduled for Thursday. Judd's newsletter, I think, had a little typo in there and said Thursday, April 5th, but today, of course, is Wednesday and also April 5th. And tomorrow, as much as I'd like it to also be April 5th, just for fun, just to see if that's possible, it will be Thursday, April 6th. I think that's when the vote is scheduled for. And it actually looks like they're going ahead with it. I mean, I thought that there was some possibility that some wingnut idiot who's, out from the nominal control of Republican leadership, perhaps, whatever that might be like, in the Tennessee House of Representatives, had introduced this thing and they just weren't going to move forward with it. But the speaker, 1, has scheduled a vote, and 2 is all in on insisting in, as he's quoted in Judd Legum's piece here, as saying that the actions of these 3 legislators, and remember that they went to the floor of the House and said, I support the protesters who have come here today and who are in the gallery, and we're going to chant for gun control measures with them and use a bullhorn to do it. I mean, it's rude, but that's all it is. And the speaker is all in on insisting that this is as bad as, if not worse than, January 6th when it comes to insurrection. It's really rather remarkable. Okay, well, let's move on to the other subjects here. Greg Dworkin is here. That's what the ringy-dingy music was all about. Let's formally welcome him, like Elijah, to tonight's Seder. Here comes Greg Dworkin. How about some wine, Greg?
How about some Schlivovitz?
That's right, yeah. Why not? It's a morning drink if you're up early and hungry.
Brandy that would make sake look like water. Have a lot of it.
Yeah, well...
Drink it like wine. See what happens.
Well, you won't make it to the second night anyway, so...
I don't think you'll make it to the second sip.
That stuff's like fire. I did have some homemade stuff in Czechoslovakia, back when Czechoslovakia was Czechoslovakia, and not just Czechia.
Yeah.
And, it's sort of like poison... Or fire?
Fire poison.
Yeah, I would say, right. Something like that. I guess it would be like being sprayed with bear spray straight down the throat, pretty much.
Listen, we have to cover Trump. And, of course, I want to cover the elections. So which do you want to do first? Do you want to do Trump and get it out of the way, or do we do the elections first because they're more important?
Elections, because they're important and fun and good news. How about that?
Okay.
I mean, Trump's
So we'll
good
do
news
that.
too, but yeah.
We'll get to Trump. We'll
That
do maybe
seems,
that in the second
I think you're
segment.
right. Important. Go on. Yes, please.
All right. So Wisconsin, Janet Protasewicz wins.
Yeah. Yes.
But she doesn't just win.
No.
In Wisconsin,
No.
1% is a landslide.
All right. I mean, if
She wins by 11.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, I was watching
That's 2
Dave
ones.
Wasserman. Okay, this is over. Okay, I think she wins by 5 or 6. Okay, I got to revise that. I think she wins by 7 or 8. Okay, wow. Overnight, John Kovalin writes,
Wow.
she cracked 1 million votes. The turnout nearly doubled from the primary to the runoff.
Well,
part of why it was so difficult, we were doing this on Monday, of why it was so difficult to figure out what the early vote meant, number one, is what do you compare it to?
Yeah.
Do you compare it to the primary? This doubled.
Yeah.
It doubled.
All right. Well, I mean, that would make it difficult. The other isn't, they don't open the votes.
Do you compare it to the general in 2022 without a president? Do you compare it to 2020 with a president? Do you compare it to 2019, which was essentially a 50-50 Supreme Court election that was off year? That was a pretty good one to compare it to.
What shall I compare the two?
But that's only the early vote. And then with the early vote, just like in Georgia, you know that they're voting, but you don't know who they're voting for. And we said that one of the things about this particular vote is that since it's so animated by abortion, you can't look at a slightly red county like Ozaukee, the O in the WOW counties,
yes,
and automatically know how you're going to vote. Because, first of all, that's Jennifer Doro country. That's the person that ran against Dan Kelly. They wanted Doro, and they didn't get Doro. They got Kelly. They don't like Kelly.
All right.
That's number one. Number two, abortion. Between those two things, I know they're voting, but who are they going to vote for? Well,
now we know. The answer is Protasewicz.
Let me give you an example. One of the biggest of the WOW counties, of course, the most famous is crucial Waukesha.
Yep.
Okay.
It's most famous around here.
Waukesha County, and I have these numbers, and I'm going to compare them. Here's your choice. You want me to compare them to Tony Evers, who slightly won, or Mandela Barnes? That's my choice because he slightly lost. Right? The Senate race in Wisconsin. Yes. Ron Johnson had 50.4% and Mandela Barnes got 49.4%. So it's basically a tie.
Okay.
Yeah. Johnson won by 26,700 votes, but, basically a tie. So that's what I was comparing it to.
Okay.
Right. So let's take Waukesha, for example. Okay. So this is 2022. You might call it a real election. I mean, it's a midterm. It's going to have a lot of people show up.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And in Waukesha, Mandela Barnes gets 37.2% of the vote. 83,000 people voted for him in Waukesha.
Okay.
All right. Last night in Waukesha, Janet Protasewicz gets 42. Compared to Mandela Barnes's 37. So she improves by 5 points. Okay. Yes. She gets 68,000 votes in what's really an off-year election.
Yeah, off-year, like...
compared to Barnes's 83. So, like 2/3 of the people turned out. That's a lot of votes.
Yeah,
right?
I think for
but Waukesha is the largest of the 3 WOW counties. All of them are Republican. Ozaukee, the least Republican, and Washington, the other W, is the most Republican. Okay, and then in Waukesha, which granted still went for the Republican-backed, although you can't call him Republican because it was a partisan election. More about that in a minute. Daniel Kelly gets 58 and Protasewicz gets 42. But Protasewicz, as Ryan Brune points out, won the city of Waukesha 10,800 to 10,700.
Oh.
That's the first Democrat liberal in a bazillion years to actually win the city.
The heart of Waukesha County. Waukesha itself.
Yeah, Republicans won the city 61-39 in the spring primary.
Oh.
It was Doro. That's Doro country.
Oh, okay. Yes, right.
And the point is, they defected.
Okay.
They didn't vote for Kelly just because he's the conservative. They don't like him.
All right.
They voted
it's kind of important.
For nobody. Republicans only got 1,000 more votes in the runoff compared to the primary, and the Democrats gained 4,500.
Ah, all right.
Some of them were defectors, right?
Yes,
and so, hey, you can't persuade anybody these days. I got an article about that. Yes, you can. And that's relevant for the Trump indictment.
Okay. Well, there's
in fact, if you want to step back and look at the big picture, you could even argue, look, Dan Kelly
yes,
is Donald Trump. He's going for a smaller and smaller group of hardcore. And he's, repelling the normies. And look what happens. You take Wisconsin, which is a 1% is a landslide state, and you make it plus 11 for the Democrats.
Okay.
And I'm calling it for the Democrats because this is about as partisan as it gets.
Yeah, sure. Why not? Go ahead. Although that does highlight the surprising numbers, not only an off-year election, but one that isn't actually, necessarily between the parties, which makes it just, there's less money spent by the parties hyping the election, but no shortage of money spent, but
right.
It's a weird
and it was
thing.
Republican money spent on Kelly, and it was Democratic money spent on Protasewicz. Now, the biggest, fastest growing place, the most fast-growing place.
Fastest.
Milwaukee's still slightly bigger. Is Dane County.
All right.
Okay. And let me give you some numbers there. And these are the past couple of Supreme Court elections.
Oh, all right.
So it's sort of apples to apples in that sense. Not always because, you got some years where maybe it, I haven't checked this, but maybe it occurs in when other elections of importance were going on. This one was a standalone.
Okay.
But still, Rebecca Dallett, who was the more liberal candidate running, at the time, gets 80.9% of the vote in Dane. That's 107,000 votes.
Okay.
The next one, Jill Karofsky, gets 81% of the vote in Dane, but 159,000 votes. Protasewicz last night got 82% of the vote in Dane, and 192,000 votes overall. Not only is it growing, but more people are turning out for this election. Dane didn't double in size. But what's happening is that people are catching on to the fact that these elections are important.
Yeah, well, good. I guess that means the advertising that says so is working.
Right. So that's over the last 4 or 5 years. And the point is the fact that the Supreme Court flipped from conservative to liberal, which it did last night, wasn't just like an overnight thing. All of a sudden it happened yesterday because people showed up. People have been doing the work in Wisconsin for years trying to get to this place. It takes time. But reached, as they like to say in Ukraine, a culmination point. And yesterday, that battle was won by the liberals. And it's huge. It's enormous. Because next thing on the docket is going to be the existing abortion law. And people like Ali Alexander, nutcases on the right, were saying, that's it. We lost 2024. We can't win it without the Supreme Court. Which gives you an idea of what they think about electoral politics.
And the Supreme Court. Yes. Wow. Okay.
I mean, it's enormous.
Surprising.
We recognize it. They recognize it. It's a culmination point in a battle.
Yeah, to the extent that the battle is fought between opposing armies of voters who express their will, and we decide by counting the full number of votes cast, which is why they're abandoning that position entirely. Yeah. They would rather
now, just
count
again
bullets,
for comparison, since we were looking at Mandela Barnes, in 2022, Mandela Barnes and Dane got 77% of the vote and 231,000 votes.
Okay. Yes.
All right. And in Dane, Protasewicz got 82% of the vote, 197,000. I mean, that's a lot of votes. Dan Kelly got 43,000 votes out of Dane.
Dane, I would say to that. Okay.
Okay. Ron Johnson got 68,000. Ron Johnson got
Not popular.
22.7.
Huh.
And Dan Kelly got 18%. You look at 20. I only got 22% of the vote. How do you do worse than that? Well, 18. Kelly did worse than that.
Yeah, I suppose it's possible.
I mean, he was just a bad candidate. And then there are the smaller places where you scratch your head and say, what? Did that really happen? And let me give you an example. If you look all the way in the southwest corner of the state.
All right.
Right, the Baja California position, if this were the U.S.
But it's
Grant County.
Okay.
All right. Ron Johnson gets 56.7% of the vote, 11,000 votes. Small county.
All right.
Barnes gets 43.
Uh-huh.
All right. It's a Republican area.
So this would seem, yes.
Yeah. Janet Protasewicz won it yesterday, 51-49.
Wow. All right. That's
Kelly got
points.
half the number of votes that Ron Johnson did. And Protasewicz got almost as many as Mandela Barnes did. It's just astounding. And that happened in a couple other counties in that area.
All right.
Lafayette County, Protasewicz won 51-49. Grant County won 51-49. These are Republican counties.
I guess, yeah, all right.
Like crucial Waukesha City. I mean, these were flips that you just didn't see coming, and they came. Yeah, the Democrats won in the Democratic areas, and they probably won the election big because of the big Democratic areas, Milwaukee and Dane. But they also did much better in the rural areas.
Great.
And the rural areas didn't turn out. And so why was that? Because Donald Trump wasn't on the ballot.
He was in jail.
He was in court.
The jail. I mean, he was briefly in the jail.
He was in criminal court. I love that they call it that. He
Yes.
was in criminal court.
Right.
Why was he in criminal court?
Because
why wasn't he in I'm not
jailness.
guilty court?
Yeah. Right. Oh, yeah. Right. He should have gone to that one if he really wanted to.
He should have
say
gone
he
to
was
that one.
If you have a choice.
This is an argument clinic next door. This
Yes.
is abuse.
But so he did briefly have to go in and get booked and mug shotted and fingerprinted and all those fun things. Justice joking that they had to bring out the kid-sized fingerprint ink pad to get those prints. But yeah, that's all good news. And he wasn't on the ballot. He was in court.
So what was on the ballot in Wisconsin was abortion. So Jennifer Rubin writes,
we better run
after
away
a huge
from
progressive win in Wisconsin, the right wing is whining. I told you about Ali Alexander. But the race turned primarily, she says, on two issues: an 1849 abortion ban triggered by the U.S. Supreme Court's repeal of Roe v. Wade and a radical gerrymander plan. The latter, possibly the most extreme gerrymander in the country, turned a 50-50 state into a 6-2 Republican advantage in congressional seats. The state Supreme Court race, given the issues, had broken all spending records for judicial races, with tens of millions raised and spent by the candidates and third-party groups.
Yes.
If you don't care about Wisconsin, maybe you care about the House, and making a 50-50 state into a 6-2 Republican advantage, that ain't
That's
good
certainly
for Democrats.
bad, but
it's not good for democracy. It's not good for you. It's not good for me. Any way you look at it, if that state goes and sues on the basis of one man, one vote, or whatever it is they do in lawyer talk, I don't know. But if they bring it back to the Supreme Court, now it has a chance of being thrown out.
Yes.
And they know it, and that's why they were fighting so hard to keep it. That's why all that money was spent. They don't love Kelly. Kelly, of course, refused to concede. He said something along the lines of, normally I would concede, but I don't have an opponent worthy of a concession, so I won't.
Well, at least he's not a sore
and Wisconsin,
loser.
I'm predicting things are going to happen here, and you're going to deserve it. So, you won't have Dick Nixon to kick around. I mean, you won't have Dan Kelly to kick around anymore. The guy was such a partisan hack. He was basically advising the Republican Party there about how to steal the election. People understood that. They didn't want him on the court. Even Republicans didn't want him on the court.
Awesome.
Oh, and by the way, there are Republican women who want the right to abortion preserved. So he was a bad candidate. in a state where he thought he was a good candidate.
Yeah, well, he thought he rigged it.
Well, he already lost his last election by 11 points, so we went ahead and he said, well, that doesn't count because it was one of those big years where there were other things on the ballot.
I want to be the only one.
I want to be the standalone candidate. So they did, and he lost by 11 points.
That seems, well, he's consistent. It's hard to hit 11 twice.
Democratic State Party Chairman Ben Wickler, one of the few states where you can actually name the party chairman.
Yes.
Who mounted a mammoth turnout the vote operation, told me Tuesday the GOP machine thought they'd broken Wisconsin's democracy enough they could rip away fundamental rights from half the population and never suffer the consequences. Tonight, an enraged electorate proved them wrong. In the state that tips the country, Dobbs, the crowning achievement of the far right, became its undoing.
Hey, all right.
And that's just right. That's just correct.
Yeah. He might know what he's talking about.
Right? Oh, by the way, do you know what Kelly basically ran on? And this is important.
I mean, no, I guess not.
Protasewicz said,
Makes
look,
it sound like
I'm
I
for
know.
abortion rights. I'll look at the law and I'll do what the law says, but I'm for abortion rights.
Okay.
And Kelly said, that's outrageous. This is a nonpartisan election. You should never say stuff like that. I'm not telling you what I'm for. I'm just going to have my plane paid for by anti-abortion people, and I'm going to have right to life support me, and I'm going to have them tell you that I'm on their side. You know, it was the old game. And Protasewicz said, you know what? That's bullshit. Here's where I stand. And that's what Kelly was outraged at. In other words, as somebody on Morning Joe said, Republicans are used to Democrats rolling over, and they didn't roll over, and they're all upset about it.
Well, no wonder that upset them.
They played hardball. I can't believe Democrats played hardball.
I mean, hardball. Here's my position on
But it's
issues.
a nonpartisan judge election.
Yeah, but I mean, there's issues. No? I don't know. Very weird. Okay. Hi, everybody. It's me, David Waldman. Yes, the same guy who interrupts you all the time. Interrupting you one more time just to tell you again, another reminder that your contributions are what keep this show on the air, and patreon.com, Patreon.com, is still among the easiest ways to make the sustaining subscription donations that keep us afloat. Are you ready for the pep talk about how our Patreon campaign is still going strong and growing? Well, too bad. Yeah, the plain fact is we actually are headed in the wrong direction, and whereas we once had about 175 monthly patrons, we're now actually down below 150. Time to recruit some more. Not exactly the kind of news I wanted to share, but there it is. For those of you in a position to support the show, Patreon.com does make it easy to make those secure, recurring monthly contributions to do so. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. We've been through a lot together. The worst of the pandemic, we hope. The worst of the insurrection, we hope. So go ahead and treat yourself. You don't need an excuse. Give yourself the gift of a little something you enjoy in life. Support the show. And of course, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running on those options too. So thanks again, everyone, for all your support. We couldn't, or at least shouldn't, do it without you. Hope you'll be on board soon too. Thanks for all your support.
For the turn.
All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Roots Radio. We can't wait for the next segment to begin, and why should we?
Well, I was talking with David on the break.
What?
Wisconsin is probably the only state
Oh,
where
well, no wonder.
I
see.
It's the
There's
only
more?
state. That's why we're paying attention to it. It's the only state where the Republicans said, you need to listen to what Trump is saying and throw out the electors and give us the real electors. Let's challenge that. Let's bring it to the state Supreme Court.
Oh,
And the state Supreme Court, with 4 conservatives and 3 liberals, ruled in favor of throwing out this garbage. There was 1 conservative who voted with the liberals.
okay.
So they were 1 vote
Shoot,
away
I guess, but
from challenging the 2020 election.
wow.
I'm just trying to say that's why this was so important. Because is it going to come up again in 2024? Probably.
Yeah. I'm sure that's
it might.
Their hope.
And this time they wanted to have a solid Supreme Court that would say, okay, whatever it is that Trump wants us to do, we're doing. And the people said, no, you can't do that. And the reason I bring that up is because Dan Kelly was getting all pissy and Richard Nixon-y because Janet Protasewicz was too partisan. Well, this is from Jennifer Rubin's article. Kelly paid lip service during the campaign to the rule of law, but he left little doubt he's a right-wing champion, not a neutral jurist. He provided legal advice to the state GOP on the phony elector scheme. He worked for anti-abortion activists. His application to former Governor Scott Walker, quote, included a writing sample that likened affirmative action to slavery, Wisconsin Public Radio reported. Kelly served on a litigation advisory board for the Wisconsin Institute for Law and Liberty, known as WILL, a conservative group that regularly appears before the court defending Republican policies and trying to overturn Democratic ones. An abortion, of course, involves taking the life of a human being, Kelly wrote, and everybody involved in the subject knows it. Whereas Protasewicz said for Wisconsin Public Radio, I tell you what my values are because I think the Supreme Court candidate should share with the community and the electorate what their values are. Nonetheless, I'll uphold the law and follow the Constitution when I make any decisions. Nothing is prejudged. And they were furious at that.
Grr, why?
Because they said Kelly's neutral and Protasewicz isn't.
That's the opposite.
And they tried pushing that. It didn't work. So since that wasn't working, then they turned to their favorite, you got to fall back on it, crime.
Oh, sure.
And then she became No Jail Janet. And they said she's weak
works.
on crime, she's weak on this, she's weak on that. And, of course, they got clobbered. And so that was one of the states that had an election yesterday where crime didn't work for the person who was pushing my opponent is soft on crime. The other one is the mayor of Chicago, Paul Vallis, was trying to make the case that Brandon Johnson, the overtly progressive, proudly progressive candidate, who was considered to be the underdog, was weak on crime. And he said, I don't want to defund the police. I want to rethink the police. I want to rethink this whole thing. That's what we really need to do. And by the way, I'm supported by the teachers union. My opponent is supported by the police union. Let's have an election over which union you like better.
Oh, okay. And
Brandon Johnson won.
Well, what do you know? Congratulations to the teachers union, I guess.
And, probably, like in all elections, a lot of local stuff matters, which sections of the city voted for Vallis, which sections of the city voted for Johnson, who the endorsements were from, how the Latinos voted. Everything matters. But it's just yet another different example of trying to make crime the central issue. And the public said, look, I know about crime. I get it. Even in Wisconsin, home of Kenosha, we get it. We understand crime's important, but there's other things too.
Okay. That's fair. There are other things. I've heard about
it. It is fair. There are other things. They vote on them. And crime alone isn't going to get you into office the way it used to. Or maybe if it ever did, you thought it used to. You thought caravans were going to win. Ask Ed Gillespie.
Yeah.
Whatever his name is. He lost, Ed Gillespie.
Yeah, that guy.
That guy.
Where is he now? I don't know. He's still probably hanging around here in Virginia someplace, telling people probably advising people to run on his issues, even though he, has so famously lost on them. But okay.
Right. And so for that reason, I wanted to bring up this really interesting article in New York Magazine by Rebecca Traister.
All right. Let's take a look.
Here's the title: Abortion Wins Elections. The fight to make reproductive rights is the centerpiece of the Democratic Party's 2024 agenda. And again, I want to rub in the face every unnamed Republican strategist who said this issue will blow over.
You're
making too much of it, said the unnamed male white Republican operative.
And maybe not a few Democratic operatives as well.
Well, they were on
Believe
record.
it or not. Oh, were they? Okay. All right. Well,
they were quoted.
Yeah.
We don't think it's going to be.
You're only doing.
Guess what? That's why there's going to be a red wave. We're not worried about not being a red wave. The Democrats are running on abortion. Go ahead, let them.
Yes. All right.
That was not a good decision.
Okay. So really, though, could you argue the Republicans ran on defund abortion and then got clobbered for it?
Well, they're running on defund the police now because Kevin McCarthy wants to shut down the FBI, the CIA, and every other agency that somehow is anti-Trump.
And they're all anti-Trump because he's got widespread
just ask
criminal
James
network.
Comey how anti-Trump they are.
Yeah.
So Rebecca Tracer writes,
yes, right.
The question New York Representative Shirley Chisholm declared in 1969 is not, can we justify abortion? It's, can we justify compulsory pregnancy?
Mm-hmm.
Chisholm is speaking during the last period in this country's history in which American lawmakers are facing the open and urgent question how to expand access to abortion care. Chisholm's 1969 remarks survive in part because they so impressed the chair of the committee, Texas Representative George H.W. Bush, that he made the unusual move of entering them into the congressional record, explaining they deserve widespread attention.
Those were the days, I guess.
Those were the days.
But, they kind of sucked at the time, too.
Yeah.
That's the way days are, though, really.
2 years earlier, California Governor Ronald Reagan had signed one of the country's most liberal abortion laws, permitting therapeutic abortions in case of rape, incest, and threat to the life of the mother. In 1970, New York decriminalized the procedure for any reason prior to the 24th week of pregnancy, and activists won similar victories in Washington, Alaska, and Hawaii, with support from both sides of the aisle.
There are women in all of those places.
So I hear. The same year, the first bill to legalize abortion federally was introduced by Oregon Republican Bob Packwood.
All right. Yeah, and some other things.
He fought vociferously for abortion access until he resigned in 1995 amid allegations of sexual assault.
Yeah, there was that.
You give with one hand, you take with the other. What can you say?
It might be exactly what he's using to give and take.
Yeah, put your hands down.
Oh.
So Nora Ephron, then a journalist covering the convention for Esquire for McGovern in 1972, reported that the proposed abortion plan produced the most emotional floor fight of the convention. McGovern refused to support legislation, a stance he viewed as perilous to his candidacy. But women's caucus leaders believed they had at least extracted an assurance that he would reject an anti-abortion one.
Mm-hmm.
California Representative Barbara Lee, ever hear of her?
Yes.
Who attended the convention as a Chisholm delegate.
All right.
This is how you get your start in politics, kids. Remembered asking these feminist activists, do you guys believe this man?
Wow.
Lee's skepticism proved warranted. At the last minute, McGovern's campaign invited an opponent of abortion rights to give a seconding speech from the floor.
Mm-hmm.
Gloria Steinem, a founding member of the caucus, was furious. By the end of the bad night, she was tearfully yelling at McGovern's campaign manager, Gary Hart, "You promised us you wouldn't take the low road, you bastards."
Wow. Well, okay. This is some emotional exchange. That's and rightly so.
But you can't know where you're going until you know where you've been. So it took a long time to bring along Democrats. And you said, oh, you're talking about Republican operatives, some Democratic operatives.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, because, people sometimes look at this and say, I know you're right, but I'm also looking at my election, and I got to do what I got to do. That was true then. It's true now.
That's certainly the case.
And Tracer essentially is making the point, look, things have changed. The way you win is you go with it. Yeah. You don't win by trying to say, no, we'll wink, wink, nudge, nudge, let the anti-people give the talk. That's not how it works anymore. Look at Michigan. Mm-hmm. And now, after last night, look at Wisconsin.
Then you have to, and
look
it's
at
easy to look at them together if you have to. It's they're close by.
Yeah.
So,
but
it does. It takes a while to get to that realization. I know, and it's frustrating because lots of people spend a lot of years saying, "No, I'm telling you, this will work," and no, and if the party sort of hangs on by the skin of its teeth, that's enough. Because as we've learned from Wisconsin, where 1% is a landslide, and if they manage to win or even lose by 1% or so, they say, we're doing okay. We don't really need to change directions or listen to your advice or anything like that. And then, I don't know. Then one day you're forced to take that advice because, abortion finds itself the right to an abortion overturned and under threat everywhere and reverting back to laws from the 1800s, etc. So they have no choice but to go with this strategy that's been advocated all along, and it's an 11-point victory. And I don't know. I guess they now spend
but
their time
even more. I mean, looking ahead to the future, Rebecca Traister writes, the unpopularity of abortion restrictions, especially the attacks on medication abortion, has dramatically changed the politics. So Linda Lake has recently done polling on how the anti-abortion rights recent attacks are going over. The biggest surprise, she said, was that it didn't matter if you were an illegal or an illegal hostile state. It didn't matter if you were Democrat, Republican, Independent. The unanimity of opposition to restriction of access to medication abortion was stunning and almost equal across all states. You would have thought it would have differed a lot between California and Mississippi. It didn't.
Yeah, I would have rechecked those numbers.
Polling like Lake's, one operative argues, opens up a whole world of support that we can leverage to change the conversation and put the extremist lawmakers with their ever more extreme backdoor bans on the back foot. People like Dan Kelly.
Yeah, them.
Run against them on this issue. On some level, Republicans understand this. It's why Speaker Kevin McCarthy's majority has not yet passed a federal abortion ban out of the House, but Republicans are facing their own quandary. They have to find a way to satisfy a ravening anti-abortion base. The base of the Republican Party is white Christian evangelicals, nationalists.
Yes. Yeah. Now,
but heavy on the Christian evangelical. Republicans can't do this, but the politics say they should, because even within their own states, there's support for it, but not necessarily district by district. And that's why the House is the House and the Senate's the Senate. Senator has to run for the entire state, and the House can run in Marjorie Taylor Greene's district and feel safe.
Yeah.
Can't feel safe in New York, but can feel safe in her district.
It's not her district. She should stay in her district.
She came to New York and she tried to give a speech, and they wouldn't let her.
Yeah,
and that was really great. You know what happened there? Marjorie Taylor Greene shows up at the Trump arraignment.
Yes,
and she wants to, do her dog and pony show and bread and circus and stuff like that. And she starts to speak, and all these people are holding up little whistles that they've been handing out.
Yeah, blowing whistles while she's speaking.
And they were blowing whistles while she was speaking. Nobody could hear her, and so she left after only a couple of minutes.
Yes.
But did you know the whistles were handed out by the pro-Trump side?
I did hear that.
And
I don't understand
They asked the guy with the whistles, why did you hand out whistles when Marjorie Taylor Greene was speaking? And he said, Marjorie Taylor Greene was speaking? I didn't even know she was here.
And I understood that. Like, okay, well, he didn't know that part. And sure, I mean, why would you guess that? I mean, really, honestly, if you have paid any attention to anything, you would have guessed it. But what was he doing with the whistles, even if he was right and she wasn't coming?
Because that way you drown out the other side. Because they were on two sides.
There was no side.
The whole idea was they're yelling at each other, so you blow whistles to make fun of them or whatever.
Yeah, no, I like that as a tactic in a way.
Better than baseball bats.
Yes. But I have never seen, I've never seen Republicans do it, but they must have thought.
It was a single person.
Okay, I will.
And I don't even know if it's a Republican.
I mean, maybe they're lying. That's possible. It's just, it didn't really make much sense, but fine. I was happy to see it in print that the person was a Trump supporter and didn't know that she was speaking. It's not usually something you see Republicans do. It was a terrible rally.
I mean, there were not a lot of people there. The reporters outnumbered the protesters, and the only other name of note that was there was George Santos, but as Jonathan Lamar pointed out, of course Santos is going to be there. He's an ex-justice of the Supreme Court.
Right, so they're giving important interviews.
Yeah.
I think, I did see some video from it, and Republicans obviously very unclear on the concepts of these street-type protest confrontations. So, one, they brought whistles, which was dumb, because in New York, giving out free whistles in New York is probably dumb, whether there's a speech going on or not, because people are just going to blow them because that's what you do with whistles, and it's annoying. But they drowned her out pretty well, but not entirely, according to the video I was watching. But what really drowned it out was her support, her 6 or 7 people that she had with them. Her speech was organized by the New York City Young Republicans. And, so, you can imagine what they are. Yeah. Anyway, so they're standing around her, but they reacted to the whistles by saying, oh, well, we'll drown out the whistles with chants of USA, USA.
Yeah,
which,
well, Democrats in disarray.
Yeah. So it was really kind of, they did what they did, and you could hear that they were saying USA, but you can see Marjorie Taylor Greene is trying to talk. She's got a bullhorn, and she still can't be heard. The whistles were doing most of the work, but the USA chant did the rest. I thought that was really something.
Well, that way you hit all the registers, the high registers, the low registers.
Yeah, well, they did fill the spectrum there. And so I'm pretty sure that she said USA, USA for most of her speech, but I didn't know what to make of that.
Right. So Rebecca Traister says, one lesson from Michigan is to make the connections between abortion and healthcare, childcare, economic opportunity, affordable education, and democracy. When I described how Whitmer is linking abortion access to pre-K and featuring it as a centerpiece of a pro-business agenda, people get excited.
Okay.
Elizabeth Warren loves it. Takes the fight straight up the middle, she said. And as Lake said, many Democratic leaders still haven't grasped what a strong frame this is in terms of freedom. Tina Smith of Minnesota told me. There was this weird idea that voters can only have one thing in their head at a time, like crime or inflation.
Okay.
People are complicated. They have a lot of things in their head at the same time.
A lot of them are wrong.
Yep. And a lot of them are wrong, and that's part of it too.
Yeah.
So I just thought that was a fascinating look. Amy Walter says, given the solid victory of pro-abortion rights candidates and initiatives in states like Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Michigan, how does DeSantis, should he sign a 6-week ban in Florida, win back the suburban voters who've been turned off by Trump? And the answer is he can't, but it doesn't matter because he's not going to be the nominee.
Wow. All right. Well, yeah, I mean, I don't see what else he does. I mean, in a race where he's been forced by Trump to defend Trump when he should be playing up the fact that he's being indicted, I guess he's stuck. There's really no way for him not to push this ban, or he'll be abandoned as a flip-flopper.
Right.
Maybe he'll be eaten by alligators. I don't know.
So let's turn to this indictment, arraignment, stuff like that. You have to understand, unlike you, I am not a lawyer. I don't play one on TV. I don't play one on the internets.
Okay, that's.
But I'll tell you what I do know.
I was like, you have to understand it, not like you. What? Oh, there's more. Okay.
So I read lawyers on Twitter. I talk to lawyers all the time.
Yeah. Sorry.
And it seems to me, reading the commentary from the lawyers and the non-lawyers, but especially reading the non-lawyers, people are confusing a tricky case with a weak case.
All right.
This is tricky. You know why it's tricky? It's white-collar crime. You know what that means? You're rich, you hire really expensive lawyers and tax people to hide what you're doing.
Yes. You confuse the jury.
It's supposed to be tricky. If it were out there in the open, you'd get picked up right away. So of course it's tricky.
Yeah.
It's white-collar crime. And this is the bread and butter of the Manhattan DA, the New York County Courthouse. This is what they do. They prosecute white-collar crimes, which are basically financial crimes. Why? Because New York City is the financial center of the universe.
Yeah.
The Manhattan DA has done over 100 of these cases this year alone.
Is there a white-collar crime that isn't financial?
Hard to imagine.
Yeah.
Because what do white-collar people care about?
Right. I mean, that's kind of what they...
Money.
And, even a regular, whatever the other color of collars are that you commit crimes with, they're generally motivated by money too.
Collar, whatever you want to pick. And then there's Donald Trump's collar, which is a shade of orange because you can't get the stain out. I mean, there's some pictures looking at it close up.
Right.
And he's got this bronzy stain on just about all of his clothes. And so somebody had actually put up a Twitter tweet, which is really hysterical. I don't have it in front of me. No. This is a side thing, but I happen to be like a tailor and a dry cleaner. And let me explain to you how you get oily stains out of your clothes. It's just that, this is the best way to do it. Because there's two kind of stains, There's the regular stains and then there's the oil stains. And here are the products you use. And, for oil stains, you're best to go to a dry cleaner. But if you have to do it yourself, try this. If it's a regular stain that's not oil, you could try OxyClean or whatever. It was hysterical.
The internet is full of experts.
And
terrific.
And so, that's what I love about bloggers. When you have this thing on Daily Kos and you look in the comments. Yeah. And say, well, I happen to be an expert on berms and picking up oil spills, and how you use, booms and other tools in order to contain the oil. I do this for a living. I said, oh, that's really interesting. I didn't know that.
Yeah. So,
why is that relevant? Well, it was just a big oil spill in the Gulf. Let me talk about this. So I think that the thing is that when you look at what Bragg is prosecuting, again, I'm not a lawyer, but the crime seems to me to be about what you do with the money.
Yes.
And, of course, the Wall Street Journal editorial board and the other Wall Streeters are going to say, this is awful. What a weak case. You should never prosecute for this. Why is that? Because it's not hard to see why.
This is one of their favorite crimes.
And they will use the opaqueness to defend the point of view and call it weak, and don't fall for it.
All right.
Now, it's a case clearly that we have the 34 felony indictments. They're not fleshed out. They're bare bones. There's a theory of the case that's been discussed by Alvin Bragg, and he says these led to other crimes, but that remains to be proven. That's what the jury trial is for. The burden of proof is on the DA. Trump is innocent until proven guilty, all that stuff.
Well,
that's part of the process. It is a process. And so to me, as a native New Yorker, I know Trump. Trump was president. He's running for president. He's a CEO. He's rich. Big effing deal. Tough nookies. Suck it up. Have your day in court and let the Manhattan DA do what they do with white-collar crime.
Yeah.
End of story. Signed native New Yorker.
Collars. Yeah, good. Well, and now it begins. And I don't know. I mean, I think it's a good point, certainly, to say.
What the hell do you mean it's a weak case? It's about money. Let the money lawyers figure out whether or not it's a weak case or not. You don't know anything about it. I guarantee you that. You know less of that than you do about the rule of perpetuity.
That may be true. Although,
yes, well, you still don't know Manhattan DA New York tax law.
You may not. If you're a New York lawyer, you might know that, but you also know very well that half the case is often won by just lying about what the case is about in the newspapers.
Right.
So, okay, we understand that. But yes, you shouldn't, I guess, to clarify the issue further, perhaps, I mean, don't confuse, there aren't just two types of cases, open and shut cases and everything else. Like, there are strong cases that aren't open and shut. Yes. And you can win them, and win them convincingly. A weak case is, a different sort of animal. But, it probably wouldn't have progressed this far if it were, in fact, a weak case, because, Alvin Bragg or any DA has got very strong incentives not to waste time with weak cases, especially weak cases that are going to get a lot of attention. You don't want to be on everybody's radar and lose. So they know that. And, all right. Well, interesting. There will be a whole cottage industry about trying to brand this as weak case. And, actually, they really should be selling that on the Trump side. But instead, they've gone even further. And their take on it is this is tyranny, communism, / worldwide extinction, insurrection, what have you. So they're going way past they would have space to operate in saying, well, a lot of gray areas here. There's a lot of doubt. It's a weak case.
Well, that's the thing, though. I mean,
that would work better.
The hill I've picked a die on with this particular case is, first of all, these are bare bones indictments, and you don't know what the documentation is behind it. You don't know what notes they have from Weisselberg, who's in prison right now.
Yes, right.
Michael Cohen's in prison for this. Alan Weisselberg is in prison for related crimes. Everybody associated with the Trump organization is guilty of fraud. Proven in court. That's not a slander.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
The ones who are in jail were.
And they're guilty. So the idea that Trump can't possibly go down on this is ridiculous. You don't know that. It's a complicated case. He might get off. Some of the stuff might get thrown out before he even gets to trial. We don't know that.
Mm-hmm.
What we do know is that it's complicated, but weak? No. Not as long as there's documentation and Bragg says he has it. You haven't seen it. I haven't seen it. You're not in a position to say it's weak.
Yeah. Well, some of the stuff that's becoming clear that they have includes, well, for one thing, a lot of tapes, a lot of audio tapes. So that's usually pretty solid stuff. And I guess the item I saw a lot of discussion about yesterday was that Trump and Trump supporters figured that they could wiggle out from underneath a lot of these charges by using, I guess, the John Edwards defense. A lot of people now pointing
it's
that
enough
out.
to go to trial, and it brought Trump to criminal court.
That's a good thing.
And it may actually get him a gag order if he keeps opening his mouth. So don't tell me it's weak.
Right. And then we'll have this orange-stained gag to deal with afterwards. And I don't know how you get that stuff off of there. But I'd be happy to see it. He'll finally wear a mask. That's good.
Yeah. I'm just saying, sometimes you need a non-lawyer to step back and look at the bigger picture.
Yes, or at least to put things in terms that other non-lawyers will understand. The lawyers tend to stay in, even if they're describing whether it's a weak case or not, even if they want to say, no, it's quite a strong case, they do so in jargony ways.
Right.
But yeah, better to ask a non-lawyer in these cases. But I'll tell you what, if you think that's consequential, it's a weak case, how about you let me indict you with a weak case and we'll see whether you sweat.
Right.
Yeah.
How about if you're guilty
picnic.
of some light felony?
Yeah, right. But I charge you a little heavier than you think is appropriate. You're still going to sweat. It's going to be an ordeal.
Point out, and this is from Tuesday, April 4th, so it's yesterday.
CNN
poll, majority of Americans approve of Trump indictment.
Hey, all right.
60% of Americans approve of the indictment of former President Donald Trump, according to a new CNN poll, following the news that a New York grand jury voted to charge him in connection with hush money payments made to adult film actress Stormy Daniels, and I would add, in parentheses, for which Michael Cohen went to jail already.
Yeah, because that's true.
About three-quarters of Americans say politics played at least some role in the decision to indict Trump, including 52% who said it played a major role. They want him indicted anyway.
Yeah, I guess so. A lot of people thought it was political.
62% approve of it, 38% disapprove. 38%, I'd be very happy if Trump got 38% when he runs.
Yeah. Well, I hope so. And did they even bother asking, do you approve of it being the first of the indictments, or would you rather have had another of the investigations indict him first? And I'm sure nobody even cares anymore.
Only 10% see Trump as blameless. Even among those who disapprove of the indictment, the perception that Trump's actions were questionable is fairly widespread, with about half in that group saying Trump did something wrong regarding payments to Daniels. Far more in that group say he acted unethically.
Okay, so even among his defenders, they say, he was wrong. I don't like the indictment, but he was wrong. Okay, well, what happens.
Don't tell me the case is weak.
Okay.
And you want to say that it's all politics? Fine. I'll see you in court.
Yeah, right. You have to go now. So, all right. And you have to go now. And that's not so great.
Yeah,
but we'll be back tomorrow. And, all right. And, hey, happy Passover, everybody. See you tomorrow. All right. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. I got to start the next segment. It's time. I will start the next segment with this news. I didn't see, I didn't see anywhere circulated the real mugshot that I believe they actually did take of Donald Trump. But I did notice that Donald Trump was trying to raise money / grift off of a faked, they faked up a mugshot and, made him smiling evilly on, in front of the regular mugshot backdrop. And they used the one with the measurements, so you could measure somebody's height in the background, faked it up, and then they put it on a t-shirt with a big, blocky tabloid headline, not guilty, even though we haven't gotten to that stage of the trial, and that's probably not going to be the outcome of the trial anyway. But, so trying to sell those pictures as though that were his mugshot. But apparently, one, he was a lot more sullen and unhappy looking than he clearly hoped he would project in these proceedings, and as reflected in the fake mugshot that they photoshopped up. But I will note for the record that they put him against that background, and in their fake mugshot thing, they made Trump 6'5", which is even funnier. But anyway, I was wondering at the beginning of the week whether having an arrest mugshot taken, whether they were going to use that height measuring backdrop, and were we going to get an official indisputable height measurement on Trump. And I don't know. I mean, I think when they take your description, when they're giving out, APBs on escaped criminals or what have you, or, looking for a suspect for something, they give the description, usually height and weight approximate. So I imagine that they take that statistic when they arrest you, although there's otherwise not a particularly, compelling reason for weighing you on your way into jail, but whatever. I assume everything is on the up and up and legal about that. I wondered, though, about whether we were going to at least see in the picture what his height was. And I don't know that they got that from the picture, but I guess they must take those statistics. And so I've always been wondering, ever since Ronnie Jackson signed as White House physician the health report, the so-called health report on Donald Trump, listing him at 6'3" and 239 pounds, which was unlikely on both counts. It's been a pet thing with me. I always think it's hilarious to point that out, especially when he's standing next to people whose heights are also a matter of public record, and you can tell that he's either not taller than them at all or certainly not considerably taller than them, and they list their heights as 5'9", etc., things like that. But anyway, so, he got Ronnie Jackson to claim he was 6'3" and 239, importantly 239, not 240 pounds, because apparently even at 6'3", 240 pounds, puts you, I guess, in the overweight / obese category, or maybe there's no slash at all. Maybe puts you in obese, which is where a lot of people are. I mean, that's just the way America is these days. It's not a particularly meaningful thing, and he's not, 239, 240 wouldn't make him grossly obese or morbidly obese, I guess. I don't even know whether they use these terms anymore. I'm sure that the medical profession is getting together and coming up with new pronouns and things, along with terminology. But at any rate, it was pretty clear to everybody that he wasn't 6'3", and that he wasn't 239 pounds. So the rumors circulating on the internet are that the mugshot and stats that went along with it put him at 6'1", which is where his driver's license has him. And I saw shared with me this morning via social media the tweet of Travis Allen, who says, breaking, the New York City police have listed Trump's weight at 270 pounds and height at 6'1", and that seems pretty amazing. And I suppose 270, well, certainly a lot more than 239, probably a little closer to his actual weight. I, might have guessed he was even possibly heavier than that, but okay, whatever. I don't know if they have too much incentive to exaggerate about that, but even better, what a comment, right? New York police have listed Trump's weight at 270 pounds. Funny enough, all by itself, given how much lying he's been doing about it. But somebody else, Jonesy here, commenting on Travis Allen's tweet, says, well, he finally made it to 270. Which is an electoral college joke for those of you who are not immediately getting it. But that's a good one, too. And good Lord, what a number. Anyway, so we have that to cling to, at least for its humor value. Let's see, other things to consider about the Trump news. I don't know. Let's see. Is there other stuff we want to go with on the Trump news? All right. We got a few items here. I guess I'm looking at my pocket entries here. I don't know that there's reason to go back to reading word for word Judd Legum's reporting on the Tennessee situation, but I think the important addition there is just letting everybody know exactly how committed the Republican leadership is to this very weird, I don't know what you would call it, but, I don't know, like almost 1984ing gaslighting on what actually occurred there in Tennessee, and insisting to the press that this was an insurrection as bad, if not worse than January 6th. I mean, I guess I'll open it up and take a look just so you hear it as close to from the horse's mouth as possible. I'll scan it here and see if I can find the direct quote from the House Speaker there so that you know exactly what was said. And I think it's here it is. Let's see. So what's his name? Sexton. Cameron Sexton is the Tennessee House Speaker. And quoted here is saying, Sexton described the incident as, quote, at least the equivalent, maybe worse, unquote, than the violent attack on January 6th on the U.S. Capitol. That's pretty amazing. Sexton called the protest, and here too, a quote, an insurrection, end of quote, and said the goal of the Democratic legislators was, quote, to incite people to be disorderly and disruptive. And this is what Judd then describes by saying, based on this lie, Sexton and other Republican members of the Tennessee legislature have voted to begin the process of expelling the Democrats who supported the gun control protests from the legislature. The rest of it, I think, is stuff we've heard on background elsewhere. The relative rarity of expulsion as a punishment, plus the other Republicans recently found to be guilty of some egregious behavior themselves, who were not, very pointedly, I guess, not subject to expulsion motions and certainly not expelled in the end, allowed to quietly retire despite the criminal activity of which they had been convicted. All right, let's see. Back to Trump. I will share some of the opinion writing from the paper of record, the New York Times guest essay, as they say in the opinion section, and going to the question of the strength of the case. We finally know the case against Trump, and it is strong, like the State of the Union, my fellow Americans, which that becomes a thing for some reason. It's actually an acceptable syntactical construction to say, at the State of the Union address, the State of the Union is strong. I never really thought that would catch on. But like I keep saying, in a country where it has caught on to refer to attorneys general as General so-and-so, I guess we're just never going to shake this thing. Karen Friedman Agnifilo has teamed up with Norman Eisen here on this subject, in case you don't know who they are. And Norm Eisen, I recognize the name. Not familiar with Karen Friedman Agnifilo, but Ms. Agnifilo is a former Manhattan Chief Assistant District Attorney. So working in that office there has some clue about how they operate. Mr. Eisen is a senior fellow at the Brookings Institution, which probably means he knows nothing in particular, even if we do know his name. All right. For weeks, Alvin Bragg, the Manhattan District Attorney, has come under heavy fire for pursuing a case against Donald Trump. Potential charges were described as being developed under a novel legal theory. Not that that has stopped Republicans at any point. They love novel legal theories, and they'll take them all the way to the Supreme Court, but we don't have the infrastructure of corrupt rubber stamp judges that they've got at their disposal. Anyway, criticism has come not only from Trump, which, that's his job to criticize that, and his allies as expected, but also from many who are usually no friends of the former president, but who feared it would be a weak case. Lots of links here. Let's see who they may be. Let's see. They've linked to an article, a transcript of Ezra Klein interviewing David French, and I don't know if they're both of the opinion that the case is weak or just David French, but let's see what else. There's a lot of links, so I kind of was curious. From many who is linked. Let's see, another opinion piece. Maybe this is just a way to link back to clickable news or opinion stories in the New York Times and drive traffic numbers. This one is the editorial board writing back on March 30th. The Trump indictment is a poor test case for prosecuting a former president, according to, I guess, to the entirety of the editorial board of the New York Times, which is surprising. It's not that old. and seems rather foolish now in hindsight. And then let's see, one other one here. This one not linking to the New York Times, but to Time magazine. Why even some of Trump's critics think the Stormy Daniels case is weak. Who are the critics that they quote? I don't know. I'd have to read too closely into Time magazine and to find out. And I don't know that I'm all that interested in doing so. Okay. Well, at any rate, we'll read the opinion of these two as to why the case is not weak, or that it is in fact strong, which is not the same thing as just saying it isn't weak. With the release of the indictment and the accompanying statement of facts, we can now say that there's nothing novel or weak about this case. The charge of creating false financial records is constantly brought by Mr. Bragg and other New York DAs. In particular, this is Greg's point, the creation of phony documentation to cover up campaign finance violations has been repeatedly prosecuted in New York. That is exactly what Mr. Trump stands accused of, which is all the more reason why it was so foolish for George Soros to run in New York. But hey, if he's tried, it would probably be in the Eastern District of New York, not the Southern District. But who knows? And they talk, so. At any rate, the judge and jury will make the ultimate determination, but they will be far from the first to consider this question, and the answer has usually been a guilty verdict. First, a note about the Manhattan DA's office that will prosecute this case. It is hardly a typical local cog in the judicial system. In fact, it is unique. Its jurisdiction is, as Greg has said numerous times, the financial capital of the world. That means the office routinely prosecutes complex white-collar cases, or creamsicle collar cases in this case, with crime scenes that involve the likes of the BNP Paribas international banking scandal. Ooh, I forget what that is, but that's a familiar sounding name. Big cases involving powerful, high-profile individuals have been handled by the office for decades. That was proved most recently by the office's conviction of the Trump Organization. Wow, have you ever heard of them? And the guilty plea of one of its top executives, Alan Weisselberg, on charges relating to an intricate years-long tax fraud scheme. So, I mean, it is kind of dumb to say, well, it's a complex case. People won't understand it. The DA is in over his head, yada, yada. It's a weak case. They just got a conviction on the same complicated, confusing stuff. Yeah, but not something that involved a big, powerful name like Donald Trump. Oh, it only involved a big, powerful name, and it actually was Donald Trump? Oh, okay, well, maybe they have some, abilities in this area, some demonstrated expertise. The books and records, counts, laid out in the charging papers against Mr. Trump, that's a weird, I'm not grasping that sentence, but I get the idea, are the bread and butter of the DA's office. Mr. Trump, who pleaded not guilty to all charges on Tuesday, is the 30th defendant to be indicted on false records charges by Mr. Bragg since he took office just a year ago, with the DA bringing 151 counts under the statute so far. That's actually, it's interesting. I mean, it's not particularly relevant in terms of figuring out whether this particular case is strong or weak, except by implication, as I was saying earlier. I mean, he's an elected DA. He doesn't want to bring high-profile cases that he's going to lose. Certainly nothing that he thinks he's going to lose. Sometimes you have to roll the dice. Some you win, some you lose. But the idea there is for them to bring cases that they can be relatively sure they have a good, strong chance of winning. There's an internal incentive to make sure that's the case. What this is an answer to is the Trump team's lie. And, I could see how it would fly. Most people who don't follow this stuff, or, even people who follow things generally, news junkies like you and I, somebody says, well, it's a weak case because after all, it's kind of like a white collar financial crime and it's complex and, people have difficulty understanding it. So there's always a risk when you bring cases like that. And besides which, they just generally don't prosecute people for stuff like this. Even if you're a news junkie, you're liable to say, I don't know, the guy says they just usually don't do this. And I think most of us, it would be easy to persuade us on the surface that white collar crime doesn't get charged and prosecuted very often, because what we're usually getting outraged about is reading stories about white collar crime that's discovered by investigative reporters rather than district attorneys. And the story is about how, at least to date, this person has not been charged with the crime. And we very often hear about settlements being reached and, they faced 30 months in prison, but they ended up getting 3 months in prison and some probation and a fine, and people are disappointed. You hear about those stories quite often, and you don't necessarily hear big stories about the overall record of the Manhattan DA or other prosecutors on white-collar crime. But here are the actual numbers. So between that and, of course, the outright lie that the Trump organization and the Trump operation, the campaign, etc., are going to put out is, we've been targeted by this partisan prosecutor. He doesn't prosecute, how about prosecuting some real crime, buddy? There's street crime that you could be taking on, et cetera, et cetera. And by the way, Rikers Island is full, as usual, and ask around about how many people are sitting there awaiting prosecution or who have already been prosecuted for street crime violations. Ask them whether the Manhattan DA is setting them free left and right, because apparently they're not. They're in jail, and they're quite upset about it, usually. So they'll probably talk to you about that. Anyway, but the easy lie to get away with when people don't do any fact checking is they hardly ever charge anybody with stuff like this. And, they certainly don't know what they're talking about at the Manhattan DA's office. They let people off the hook like this all the time. And I guess in the past, Manhattan DAs have let Donald Trump off the hook a lot. That's true. And so maybe that's the background that they're hoping is in people's heads when they say, hardly anybody gets charged for this stuff. But here are the facts. There's not only is it not true that they don't charge this crime very often, but it's also not true that these crimes had to be pulled out of dusty old law books in order to hit Trump with something. They had to go looking for a statute to charge him with. This is actually fairly frequent. They charge this stuff all the time. They didn't necessarily have to go out of their way to charge Trump with this or to find charges to bring against him. This is, again, just so you have the numbers, the 30th defendant to be indicted on false records charges by Mr. Bragg since he took office just over a year ago. So about 30 times a year, which is to say twice a month or more, Alvin Bragg indicts people on false records charges. So, one, it's not little known or obscure. Two, Trump is by no means being singled out here. He's just one of a couple people this month who are going to be charged with the same stuff. And the DA has brought 151 counts under this statute so far, usually, I'm sure, paired with some other things in other cases, but not a rarity, not an obscurity. Indeed, the Trump Organization conviction of the Weisselberg and the Weisselberg plea included business falsification felonies itself. So, the 34 felony books and records counts, I got you now, in the Trump indictment, turn on the misstatement of the hush money payment to Stormy Daniels, arranged by Michael Cohen in the waning days of the 2016 election, and repayment of that amount by Mr. Trump to Mr. Cohen, ostensibly as legal expenses. That's the falsification that took place, right? If they had, I know it would have been bad and dumb for them, electorally speaking, to have an entry on the ledger, hush money repayment, but at least that's not chargeable. You just say, well, that's questionable judgment all around, but that's about it. All right. So now I understand the books and records counts. That is to say, I'm charging you with a count of criminal activity based on what you've done with your books and records. Now I understand. Okay. So There are 11 counts for false invoices, 11 for false checks and check stubs, and 12 for false general ledger entries. This allegedly violated the false records statute when various entries were made in business documents describing those payments as legal fees. They were not. They were hush money. Moreover, the statement of facts alleges that deals, including one for Ms. Daniels and another for Karen McDougal that involved the National Enquirer, which had long-standing ties to Mr. Trump, were for the purposes of helping him win the presidency. If that is proved, then the deals would be attempts to violate state and federal election laws, as Mr. Bragg said in a statement, such as on their amounts and disclosure. In this theory, the false records in the indictments covered up the campaign finance violation. So there's at least two ways in which these false records were wrong. One, you're not supposed to create false records. And two, you're not supposed to lie about your campaign finance activities. And these false records were, in fact, lies about that. So we got two problems there. And by the way, that's an excellent differentiation between the John Edwards case and the Donald Trump case, at least in terms of what the jury believed and what the outcome of the John Edwards case was. I don't know if I would have believed it at the time, but the allegation or the defense was in the John Edwards case that they said, well, why did you make these payments of hush money to keep your affair quiet? And he gave the correct answer for the situation, which is, well, I know people think that I was trying to cover this up so that I could win the election. But, well, one, I was running for vice president, and that's not a super effective strategy. But anyway, he was able to plausibly claim, I made these payments because I was embarrassed about this affair, and I didn't want my wife to find out about it, and I wanted to protect my marriage. Now, coin toss as to whether or not you decide you want to believe that, or you would rather believe that elections were the more important thing in John Edwards' mind. But at least he didn't say, yeah, by the way, that's all crap. I really don't care about my marriage. I was really focused on the election. But Donald Trump and his cadre did say things like that. And apparently, one, there are tapes of them saying it. Not, hey, I don't really care about my marriage, but rather tapes of them apparently saying, well, including one tape allegedly of Trump saying to Michael Cohen, maybe we can delay the payments to Stormy Daniels. And if we delay them enough such that we get through the election, if I win the election, or really even if I lose the election, at that point, the election is over and it's no longer really very interesting for me to cover up the story. So then F it, and we'll save $130,000 that way. I don't care if she tells the story after the election. If I win, it's too late to do anything about making me president. And if I lose, I was never going to be president anyway. So what's the difference? And that's pretty good evidence that you don't care about your current marriage in terms of this information becoming public. Not great for the claim that I was just trying to protect my marriage and not trying to manipulate the election. That's one of the big differences there. Okay. With the particulars, or while the particulars of Mr. Trump's case are unique, his behavior is not. Candidates and others have often attempted to skirt the disclosure and dollar limit requirements of campaign finance regulations and falsified records to hide it. Contrary to the protestations of Mr. Trump and his allies, New York prosecutors regularly charge felony violations of the books and records statute and win convictions when the crimes covered up were campaign finance violations, resulting in false entries in business records to conceal criminal activity. I guess it happens a lot. For example, here's an example for you. Ready? The Rockland County DA convicted the executive Richard Bragg for falsifying business records by misrepresenting the source of funds that he funneled into a campaign. The Oneida County DA, these are all counties in New York if you're not from the area, charged a county political party chair, John Dote, not John Doe, John Dote with a T in the middle there, and the T is crossed in case you were wondering, with pilfering campaign funds and then failing to properly account for them, resulting in a conviction for felony falsification of business records. And by the way, second-degree larceny. they throw that in there. That helpfully clears things up. He stole the money from his campaign and then failed to properly account for having stolen that money, which is really kind of funny because the law expects you to write down, this is money that I stole from my campaign. Now, if you do that, you'll be caught and convicted for stealing money from your campaign, but you won't be convicted of falsifying the records about where that money went. So you save yourself that, if you're willing to be honest. But that's one of the funny things, and that's the Al Capone-ness of it, right? Okay. Well, now we'll nail you on both. And it's funny that you have to come back parenthetically and say, oh, and by the way, pilfering the money from the campaign is second-degree grand larceny, and we convicted you for that as well. Just so you don't lose sight of that. The Brooklyn DA, one last example here, convicted Assemblyman Clarence Norman for soliciting illegal campaign contributions and for felony falsification of business records, and on and on and on, in New York and federally. Okay, one more paragraph here before we exit. Perhaps there have also been several analogous prosecutions for falsifying records to cover up campaign violations in New York and elsewhere that did not result in conviction. Maybe we'll return to those, and differentiating more Trump claims from prior cases in our last segment after this. Hi everybody, it's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com, and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Well, maybe we just stop. Ricky, the Kanakistani, although she is Kanakistani, don't lose sight of that, says, do you really have to cover the former guy, TFG? Don't you think that if we stop talking about him, he might go away? No. I mean, I don't think he's going to go away. I don't know if that really works for him. But okay. I mean, we don't really have to necessarily cover him. I don't know, but I think it's really interesting. It's clearly going to be in the news for a while, and we do get a chance to root for his conviction. But I suppose if we covered it every day between now and the conviction, even if it works out and he gets convicted and he goes to jail, that's an awful lot of discussion about him. But, okay, all right, fair point. But now I'm sort of committed to it, but mostly on procedural grounds, just so that we kind of know what's going on. But, all right, point well taken. And perhaps we have to be measured in our coverage of him going on. But I guess today's the rainbow day versus the heavy cloud day, where we get to celebrate the fact that he's going to face trial somewhere. And it's not the only one. Plus, as I said, I'm already halfway into this article. So now I kind of have to feel like I have to go on. And it's also as much about clarification of what's being reported in the media as anything else. And I think you probably understand and would agree with that. I mean, definitely understand it. Probably would agree. I don't know. But at any rate, we're going to continue on with the coverage, and we'll all understand at least what's happening legally, and that's always good, and you can always apply the same knowledge by analogy to future cases, and I guess by all accounts, or by this account anyway, Alvin Bragg will be bringing charges like this against any number of people on a continuing basis in the future, and who knows who else will face these sorts of charges. It's Manhattan, and a pretty good chance that any one of those cases will make national news, and we'll understand what's going on beneath the surface for having shared this information now. Okay. Right. So there was the reminder from the writers here that there have also been several analogous prosecutions where there was not a conviction in the end. That in itself is not unusual, as judges and juries sometimes disagree with the prosecution, and it is in fact a good thing, a sign of a criminal justice system that tries to operate with fairness. What these cases demonstrate is that Mr. Bragg is not navigating uncharted waters. They also support a corollary point in favor of this prosecution. Some legal analysts have pointed to an intent to defraud issue with the charges. The statute says that a person is guilty of falsifying business records when, quote, with intent to defraud, the individual commits certain acts. And I guess the idea is to defend Trump by saying you'll never be able to prove that he did this with the intent to defraud. Let's see how they evaluate this. Those analysts say that it requires proving that the scheme resulted in cheating or depriving another person of property or of a thing of value or a right, and that there is no such evidence here. That may be the case in other jurisdictions, but in New York, there is no such requirement, and there's apparently some links proving that that's the case, including one to Just Security, which we read with fair frequency. I'm just curious about what is this piece that they're heading to. It's Ryan Goodman, Norm Eisen, so that's how he knew about it, because he's the author on both of these. Sylvan Watt, Joshua Kolb, and Joshua Stanton. Double helping of Joshua's on this piece. The broad scope of intent to defraud in the New York crime of falsifying business records. A lengthy and doubtless dry dissection of the requirement over in Just Security, but it is linked in this article. We can't read through this now. It's going to drive Ricky up the wall if we do that. But if you're actually interested in the procedure and law behind it and want more, there's more to be had. There's always more to be had in the subject of the law. New York appellate courts have held in a long series of cases that intent to defraud includes circumstances in which a defendant acts, quote, for the purpose of frustrating the state's power. That's like basically obstruction. And I think we all know that Trump has a long and intimate relation with obstruction. But again, where defendants act for the purpose of frustrating the state's power to, quote, faithfully carry out its own law, unquote. To the extent Mr. Trump was covering up campaign contributions that violated New York law, that seems to be exactly what he did. It's also worth noting that Mr. Trump was a federal candidate, whereas the other New York cases involved state ones, that is to say, state candidates. But court after court across the country has recognized that state authorities can enforce state law in cases relating to federal candidates. Those courts have allowed state cases concerning federal campaign contributions under widely varied circumstances, including for fraudulently diverting funds from political action committees founded to support federal presidential campaigns, violating state law limits on corporate contributions to federal campaigns, and transgressing state laws concerning donations to PACs that funded federal campaigns. Some of the examples involve criminal enforcement by state authorities, some civil, but the point is the same. They can act, in case you thought they couldn't because it was a federal law. So, Mr. Bragg's bringing a state case concerning a federal campaign is hardly novel. In an abundance of caution, he not only alleges violations of state campaign finance law, but also alleges federal violations. We believe that is permitted, given that the fraudulent books and records and other relevant statutes refer simply to covering up, quote, another crime, or using, quote, unlawful means, and do not specify whether they need be federal or state, right? In other words, it's no excuse to say, well, the state law about falsifying your books and records says, if it had said that you need to be charged with covering up a crime that the state would ordinarily be enforcing against you and breaking a state law, then they'd have something. I mean, you're breaking state books and records laws, but if you're trying to link it up to something else. But all it says is if you are falsifying your books and records in order to cover up another crime, just any kind of crime, federal, state, local, municipal, international, I don't know, whatever, that's all it takes. It just has to be another crime, and federal crime is another crime. This approach is, he says, wise, or they say, wise because to throw out the case, a judge would have to rule that Mr. Trump is covered by neither state nor federal campaign finance law, and that's probably not the case. We think it is unlikely that the courts will embrace that catch-22. Whatever happens next, one thing is clear. Only the U.S. Supreme Court would go so far, I suppose. We have to leave that possibility out there. Whatever happens next, one thing is clear. Mr. Trump cannot persuasively argue that he is being singled out for some unprecedented theory of prosecution. He is being treated as any other New Yorker would be with similar evidence against him. The indictment is therefore anything but political. If anything, the more political choice would have been not to indict when there is so much scrutiny. Mr. Bragg appears to have the backbone to avoid such considerations in charging decisions. Good for him and for the rule of law. Okay, that seems pretty cool, I guess, and probably about as much as Ricky wants to hear about the former guy, but I do have one extra thing. And I feel compelled to bring this one up because I think Scott intended for me to read this article, but he grabbed a quote from the article and I read that aloud, but there wasn't the link to the article. But I found it because I wanted to find something to back up the quote that I had read, and I didn't need to provide it to Scott because he was the one who provided the quote to me. He knew what the link was. But once I found it, I realized, I should have read this article aloud because yesterday we spent time discussing Donald Trump's and trying to dissect Donald Trump's weird claim that, hey, they had to pay, which they didn't, $18 million to Richard Nixon after they took his tapes. Of course, Nixon was dead and his estate brought the suit, and of the $18 million that was finally settled on, only about 90,000 of it actually went to the executors of his estate. The rest of it went to the lawyers and to the Richard Nixon Library. But we were trying to figure out, well, why even bother? Like, why, if he's committed a crime here, and basically we're talking about seizing evidence of a crime, where do we even get around to compensating the perpetrator of a crime for the seizure of the evidence against him? That's a weird thing. And, well, there's more to discuss about that, including Matthew Rigdon, who weighed in with this possibility. And I think there's something to it. But he says, by the way, just to add some personal context here, apologies, he says, if I missed this in the article you read. And you didn't. We didn't get around to it in the article. He says he was worried about possibly missing it because he was washing dishes and listening. So he's just like you and me, folks. Sniff. Very, we all have to do these things. But an article, he says, that he read about the Nixon case was that the Presidential Records Act passed after Nixon's time in office. And that's true. So the library was able to make a case. That is to say, the idea that Nixon should be compensated because they took the evidence against him. I know that's really kind of weird. And you say, I don't understand. The Presidential Records Act says that this stuff doesn't belong to him. How could he be compensated for it? A good reminder that the Presidential Records Act did, in fact, pass after Nixon's time in office and was passed because of Nixon's time in office. And someone said, you know what? This is so dumb and ridiculous what Nixon was able to do and get away with it. There ought to be a law. And then they came up with that law and passed it. So I'm sure the court was considering the seizure of the tapes without the context of the Presidential Records Act, which is just chronologically true, although by the time they were doing this suit, the Presidential Records Act had been on the books for a long time, but I don't know whether the court, I didn't follow that case closely enough or read about it closely enough in law school to remember whether the court felt compelled to evaluate the situation as it then existed prior to the passage of the Presidential Records Act, or whether they say, well, now the civil lawsuit comes in the context of the long-established Presidential Records Act. But I could see the court saying, well, at the time, we should consider the context that existed at the time, not because they're originalists, but because they're being fair about things. So, yes, that's entirely possible, and Matthew concludes by saying the law as written now should preclude Trump from doing the same, if I understand it properly. And we're never really sure whether we understand things properly. And even if you do understand things properly, we also know from our own study of Supreme Court jurisprudence and not very prudent prudence, that sometimes the members of the court are hell-bent on proving everyone pre-wrong, our own favorite term here when we discuss particularly political court decisions. And they've been waiting for years to prove to you that you misunderstood everything the whole time. You thought you understood settled law, but we're going to unsettle the law and just change the facts on the ground. And now you're all wrong. You all understood the Presidential Records Act to differentiate between the cases of Trump and Nixon, and they do. But 5 black-robed justices managed to cobble together the votes necessary to say, that understanding just doesn't apply. We don't have any particular logic as to why. It just doesn't. And, you can't appeal from that if they decide to go that route. So, as I should have read, I don't know whether, I still don't know for sure whether Scott, and it's probably a closer scrutiny of yesterday's summary post and following all the links will tell me if this is where he got it from. But I didn't find his particular formulation that he sent me in text message of, the quoted material and non-quote material. Together only yielded one hit, and it was from factcheck.org. Fact-checking Trump's rally, Fox interview by Lori Robertson, Robert Farley, D'Angelo Gore, and Eugene Kiley, or maybe Keeley, I don't know, Kiely, posted on March 30th. And I guess that was a couple days after the Hannity interview in which Trump says, I have the right to take stuff. You remember that whole thing? The whole setup for this question about the Nixon outcome. And I have the right to take these things, and you're talking about the Presidential Records Act. And now a good dissection of that exists in this fact check article. In his first 2024 campaign rally in Waco, Texas, and in a recent interview, former President Donald Trump repeated many claims we've fact-checked before, but he also made new, false, and unsupported statements. Hooray. And they are bulleted here. In talking about the FBI search of Mar-a-Lago, they're of course referring to it as Mar-a-Lago, Trump may have left the false impression that an $18 million settlement in a case involving former President Richard Nixon was relevant to his situation. He did, in fact, leave that false impression. Trump claimed also that South American countries are emptying their prisons and mental institutions, which they put in quotes there, and sending these people to the U.S., but immigration experts tell us there is no evidence of that happening. And the other unrelated bullet comment, but because I've started down the path of reading you the bullets, the former president called the official count of drug overdose deaths a, quote, lie, and claimed without evidence that the figure is, quote, probably 5 times higher. It's probably not. The Center for Disease Control and Prevention told us that any undercount in overall drug overdose deaths should be relatively small as compared to, say, the undercount probably of COVID cases and COVID deaths. But anyway, on to the Nixon settlement not being relevant to Trump, and we'll just stick with that for the time being. And if you want to read about the dissection of his other lies as bulleted above, you can go ahead and do so. I'll provide you the link in Scott's summary. But on Nixon, in talking about the FBI search of Mar-a-Lago for classified documents Trump took when he left the White House, the former president may have left a false impression that his situation was comparable to former President Richard Nixon. And we've spent a lot of time on that false impression. Trump mentioned an $18 million settlement in a case about Nixon's presidential materials, including the infamous Watergate tapes, but that case has nothing to do with the Presidential Records Act, which is Matthew Rigdon's point here, which established that all presidential records, starting with those of President Ronald Reagan, are the property of the United States. When a president leaves office, the archivist of the U.S. takes custody of those records. It wasn't the case when Nixon was president, became the case once Ronald Reagan was president. So I guess Jimmy Carter gets away with this one too, if necessary. In a Fox News interview that aired March 27th, Trump told host Sean Hannity, quote, "This is the Presidential Records Act." And there's more quote to it, but you have to stop. The first sentence of his statement is a lie. It's not the Presidential Records Act that you're talking about when you're talking about Richard Nixon's case. It's prior to the passage of the Presidential Records Act. If you are talking about the Presidential Records Act, then you're guilty and your case is, you're done. You're guilty and you shouldn't bring it up. But it's not the Presidential Records Act. I have the right to take stuff. That also is not true. Do you know that they ended up paying Richard Nixon, I think, $18 million for what he had? And that part is sort of true, but they didn't end up well, no, it isn't true. They didn't pay Richard Nixon. They paid his estate. They didn't pay his estate $18 million either. So, that's all false. They did the Presidential Records Act, and that's just Trump, inanity and bad syntax, and he doesn't know what he's talking about, and it's word salad. They did a Presidential Records Act to him. Sure. Anyway, I have the right to take stuff. I have the right to look at stuff, but they have the right to talk, and we have the right to talk. This would all have been worked out. All of a sudden, they raided Mar-a-Lago. Viciously raided Mar-a-Lago. Might as well just say it in his voice, the Mar-a-Lago part. Well, we'll explain, says factcheck.org, what happened with that $18 million settlement. An amount that did not actually go to Nixon or his heirs. But first, Trump doesn't have the right to take stuff unless that stuff is purely personal and not presidential. The Presidential Records Act says, upon the conclusion of a president's term of office, and we have that, the archivist of the United States shall assume responsibility for the custody, control, and preservation of and access to the presidential records of that president. The archivist then shall have the affirmative duty to make such records available to the public as rapidly and completely as possible. It's pretty clear. But he says it's the opposite. So there you go. Furthermore, Trump's claims that the dispute over presidential materials that he took would have all been worked out through talking without the need for an FBI search ignores that Trump took 8 months to comply with the National Archives and Records Administration's requests, the talking part, the requests for boxes of presidential documents that he had stored at his Mar-a-Lago sex dungeon home. Once the National Archives discovered classified documents among those records and referred the matter to the Department of Justice, Trump's lawyers, in responding to a subpoena, handed over a single envelope with 38 classified documents, attested that a, quote, diligent search hadn't turned up anymore, and prohibited the DOJ from inspecting boxes of materials still housed at Mar-a-Lago. A few months more after that, the FBI obtained a court-approved search warrant and retrieved 13 boxes that contained documents with classification markings and, in all, over 100 unique documents with classification markings, according to the DOJ court filing. We've explained all that before. So, through all the talking, they talked, and he just didn't respond to any of the talking. And then they had to go the subpoena and search route instead. Now, back to the Nixon case. And by the way, now there's, of course, new evidence that implies that, or maybe directly proves, that Trump, after the subpoena, went into the boxes himself and went through them and made arrangements to try to hide documents further and protect them from being discovered by FBI search should it ever come to that. He knew that was coming and wanted to defeat their ability to take these documents away from him. Why? Because he thinks he, quote, has the right to having them. And as supplemental material for his demented theory, he deliberately, I think, misunderstands the Nixon case as a way to bolster his claim, which has no other basis in law, and it doesn't really work. And here's why. Before the Presidential Records Act, which was signed into law in 1978, 4 years after Nixon leaves office, and applied to White House materials beginning in 1981, records that a president created were considered to be the president's private property. They could keep, destroy, or donate the documents to the United States, as several presidents did, to be housed in presidential libraries. But once Nixon, after resigning in 1974, wanted to destroy tape recordings that documented White House activities regarding the Watergate scandal, once he hinted that he wanted to do this, Congress passed the Presidential Recordings and Materials Preservation Act. That law said that the National Archives would have complete possession and control of White House recordings from Nixon's presidency and all other historical documents. The law applied only to Nixon, as the National Archives explains, and there's an explainer herein linked. Nixon sued. The former president's case challenging the law went to the Supreme Court, which ruled against him in 1977, finding that the act was constitutional. Nixon then sued for compensation from the federal government under the Takings Clause of the Fifth Amendment. That clause says, of course, that the government shall not take, quote, private property for public use without just compensation. Well, that took a long time to resolve itself because in 1992, the U.S. Court of Appeals for the District of Columbia Circuit ruled that Nixon was entitled to compensation. And I guess he'd be the only person entitled to compensation under this situation because the law that took his possessions applied only to him. So it's a totally unique case right from the get-go. The court said that because there had been a tradition of presidential ownership of White House papers, a tradition now ended by the Presidential Records Act, Nixon had a property interest in his papers and materials, which amounted to more than 40 million items. Under the Constitution, the court said, just compensation was required because the government took that property. The nature of the law changed later on and made it not his property. But while this happened to him, it was still, by tradition, his property. The appeals court sent the case back to the district court to decide what compensation should be. Well, the federal government thought it should be $0, or they probably would have been okay to say $1 if they just wanted to concede the point, while the Nixon team wanted more than $200 million, a sum that factored in 25 years of interest. And it's a good financial theory, we'll say that much. I thought we had a decent case. Neil H. Koslow, the lead counsel for the U.S. on this case and now a partner at Potomac Law Group, told us of the federal government's argument during a months-long trial. But before the judge made a decision, the Nixon team proposed a settlement. My superiors at the Department of Justice decided to accept it. So they didn't really get the case to go to trial, and they don't actually have any precedent, I guess, established under that one weird carve-out situation. And I guess they don't really need it because Nixon's dead and he's not going to do this again. But, yeah, there's some argument that, no trial court has ever really decided how much compensation you should get. Instead, a settlement was reached. That's of limited value. The protracted legal battle finally ended in the $18 million settlement in 2000. Nixon, of course, had died in 1994, and his heirs actually got very little of that $18 million. We learned that yesterday. When the settlement was announced, news organizations reported that Nixon's representatives said the lawyers would get $7.4 million and the Nixon Foundation would get $6 million for a presidential library. After millions in taxes were paid, Nixon's two daughters were left with about $90,000. Trump's mention of the case might leave the false impression that he or other presidents could be entitled to compensation as well. But of course, we know this is a very unique situation. They are not. No president since Reagan could even attempt to make the legal arguments that Nixon did because of the Presidential Records Act, which made presidential records public, not personal property. It is no longer possible for any president to assert ownership, Kozlow told us. That's gone. That's the whole point of the Presidential Records Act, and that's why we were so confused yesterday. Jason R. Barron, professor of the practice at the University of Maryland and former director of litigation at the National Archives and Records Administration, echoed that comment. Under the PRA, Barron told us in email, presidential records are owned by the American people, not the president himself. The records of every president from Ronald Reagan to President Biden are covered under the PRA. When Trump's term in office ended on January 20th, 2021, all of his presidential records were required to be transferred to the National Archives and Records Administration. Trump has no right to be compensated for the lawful return of documents into government custody that he does not and has never owned. The Nixon case is an interesting piece of history, but it has no parallels to Trump's situation. Great! That settles that, and that settles today's episode of the Kagro in the Morning Show as well. Time now to hand things over to Justice Putnam for the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. And now a little bit of time to tell you about what he's got on tap for you. Well, first up, of course, Trump, sorry, Ricky, got away with the Access Hollywood tapes politically, but will pay for it legally. Ooh, boy. And then on the rest of the menu, Hawaii lawmakers are considering legislation that would require tourists to pay for a year-long license to visit state parks. That's an interesting bent on things. See what we can find out about that next.
NetworksRadio.com. You have been listening to Kagro in the Morning with David Waldman.
Ooh, back to the issue of judge shopping. The state of Washington has purchased a 3-year supply of abortion pills ahead of the court ruling out of Amarillo, Texas. And still reeling from a weekend of deadly weather, the risk of severe storms persists from Texas to the Great Lakes. That's a large portion of the country. Today, stay tuned. Find out more next.